Welcome back. U.S. Congressman Scott Perry has claimed that the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, funded terrorist organizations, including Boko Haram. Perry, a Republican representing Pennsylvania, made the claim during the inaugural hearing of the Subcommittee on Delivering of Government Efficiency on Thursday.
Here's what you need to know. Congressman Perry mentioned that United States taxpayers' money has been sponsoring terrorist operations such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Boko Haram. Boko Haram attacks have resulted in deaths of more than 300,000 children, displaced 2.3 million people from their homes, and contributed to regional food crisis and famines. United States President Donald Trump established the Department of Government Efficiency via executive order. The team led by billionaire Elon Musk uncovered fraud and malpractices after assessing confidential government documents.
Now, before we get into the conversation proper, let's get to take a look at the video where these claims were made, after which we'll bring in our guests to join the conversation.
I just mentioned the $697 million is on top of, and is in addition to the weekly to every 10-day shipments in cash of $40 to $80 million. Afghanistan is ruled by folks named Sarajuddin Haqqani. The Haqqani network mean anything to anybody in the room? How about Abdullah bin Laden? Who gets some of that money? Does that name ring a bell to anybody in the room? Because your money, $697 million annually, plus the shipments of cash funds madrasas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, ISIS Khorasan, terrorist training camps. That's what it's funding. If you think that the program under Operation Enduring Sentinel, entitled Women's Scholarship Endowment, which receives $60 million annually, or the Young Women Lead, which gets about $5 million annually, is going to women who, by the way, if you read the Inspector General's report, is telling you that the Taliban does not allow women to speak in public. Yet somehow you're believing, and American people are supposed to believe, that this money is going for the betterment of the women in Afghanistan. It is not. You are funding terrorism, and it's coming through USAID. And it's not just Afghanistan.
To discuss the veracity and the implications of this statement on Nigeria's security, we're joined this morning by lawyer and public affairs analyst Abdul Mahmud. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Modi. Thank you for having me. And good morning, Benga.
You're welcome.
Good morning. You're welcome to the show. I think a good way to begin would be to get the first thoughts that you had when you saw that clip. It's since gone viral on social media. The government has, of course, denied it. And there have been mixed reactions on social media. But let's get your first reactions when you saw the video.
When I first saw the video, I wasn't surprised. The news sat with what I know, what is in the literature on conflict resources funding, aid dependency, and if you like as well, conflict trap. Funding of destabilization movements around the world, particularly by AIDS Development Agency, may not be through the ways that we usually know. In the course of our presentation this morning, I'll look at more specifically how destabilization movement like Boko Haram are funded through ways like conflict resource funding, where you throw aid agencies into conflict geography or conflict area, and resources are pushed into that conflicted area. Resources become like prizes for terrorist group to win, and they usually win. We also see government to government aid funded, particularly in terms of military assistance. And if you look at the conflicted geographical area in the northeast, more particularly in Maiduguri, and the way Boko Haram terrorists storm military barracks and move away with military hard armament. You can also come to the conclusion, as most scholars have done, like Paul Collier, like Dollar. Who else have I read on literature? So many scholars have concluded that when hard military armament are stolen by terrorists, from military barracks in conflicted areas, one can also argue that this is one of many ways that terrorist groups are funded. The claim made by Scott Perry, appears ludicrous to many.
All right, Mr. Mahmud, if you may please hold that thought. We'll delve deeper into, you've talked about a lot of the scholarly positions, but some would argue about hard evidence and the role that might play in ensuring that, we can come to a conclusion that this is for sure the position. But let's go on a very quick break, and when we come back, we'll delve more into the conversation. Back to the show, we're still looking at the allegations of USAID funding terrorist organizations here in Nigeria, and we're joined by lawyer and public affairs analyst Abdul Mahmud. Thank you very much for joining us. Before we went on the break, you were speaking about some of the scholarly articles that you've read and pieces that have been written about these claims and how it wasn't a surprise to you. Some of the arguments that we have seen about it would be, if there really is like hardcore evidence, especially judging by the personality and the controversies surrounding the character or the person of Congressman Scott Perry, is that an argument that should maybe be considered?
I don't think, in the context of what Scott Perry has made, that we should use the hammer to kill the messenger while we live out the message. Those who insist on hard evidence are not sincere. Let's look at the fundamental basis of foreign aid. Aid, for example, is attached to the foreign policy directive of sovereign national states. And in more cases than not, these aids are driven by national security interests, as they relate to the global interests of the nations that are pushing these aids. So the point I'm making here is this: if you are insisting on hard evidence, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Aids resource that are driven by Central Intelligence Agency. We've had literatures starting from the one written by Philip Addy in the 1960s, Inside the Company, CIA Diary, even right to the one written by Peter Wright, Spy Catcher, that indicted the intelligence operations of the British MI5 and MI6 overseas. We do know that these overseas development aid are part of the national security interest of sovereign national states. So if we are looking for hard evidence, you will not find them. But if a congressman could sit in the hallowed chambers of his country's national Congress and make such an allegation, it's important for us to look at the allegations and see if they are true. But in the context also of what we know, don't forget that since 2012 in our country, our national government, our federal government, particularly specific personages of power within the government. Let me start with Dr. Jonathan Goodluck. General Ihejirika, even up to CDS, the Minister for Defense, General Christopher Musa, have all consistently made the point that foreign interests are involved in the conflict in the northeast of Nigeria. So it behooves of Nigerians to now ask, who are these foreign interests? What are their interests in the northeast? But if you pose these questions, people will tell you they are part of the conspiracy theorists. I've made a point. In areas where there are conflict, resources also flow into the hands of terrorists, whether in terms of cash or in terms of prices or in terms of cash crops. All of these help to aid, the terror, imposed on conflicted areas by terrorist groups. And consistently too, since 2012, consecutive governors of Borno State have constantly proposed the point that aid agencies, non-governmental organizations operating in Borno State have interests that meets the ordinary, in the course of the evolution of the conflict in that state. What Scott Perry has done is openly made the allegation that the U.S. government has consistently formed Boko Haram in Nigeria.
Okay, Abdul Mahmud, like they say in this past, there's no smoke without a fire, and you've helped us to highlight the difficulty improving espionage, going back in history and looking at the way intelligence networks operate from Mossad to MI6 and all of that. Now, Nigeria is a sovereign country. It's battling insecurity, and these allegations, these are very weighty allegations. If you could send a message to the Intelligence High Command, the Commander-in-Chief, and the top military brass, what strategies can nations like Nigeria adopt to counteract such covert operations? Because they're not going to, obviously, like you said in your opening statement, that, okay, this money is for Boko Haram and all of this. How do we maintain our territorial integrity and also protect lives and properties of Nigerians?
Let me not sound pessimistic here. I was a delegate to the National Congress in 2014. The then boss at the National Immigration Service had a 3-hour closed-door session with us, where we were told that from the border point in Jigawa in the northeast to somewhere in Banki in Yobe State, across to Borno State, borders that run across 419 kilometers or thereabout or more, 4,119 kilometers or more, are just open borders. You can just walk across our country into Chad and into Niger and return back. There is no form of institutional control over those who come in and who come out. So when we see our military combat these terrorists, I pity them, because at the end of the day, we have open borders that allow terrorists, to walk across from the deeper Sahel into our country to impose terror and terrorism the way they have done. If we want to put a handle on this conflict in our country, we have to pose our national border issue as a national security question. This we are willing to do. I was in national conference, many delegates in national conference, particularly from northern Nigeria, opposed any discussion on Nigeria's open border in the north, for very obvious reasons. Some of them will argue that creating a wall, the Trump-like wall, across our border will cut off our kids from their kin in countries like Niger and Chad. That's one. Two, we have to resolve, if it is in our national interest, to allow the conflict to fester. That resolve is what I do not see. The issue of conflict resource that I raised earlier on has become a major issue in the combat of terror and terrorism in our country. If you look at the number of, if you look at the monies we have voted into the fight of terrorism, you ask yourself, why have we not found results? Simply because these generals who are the national HQ, combat HQ of the Nigerian army, are not interested in ensuring that this conflict ends. So it has become like a corruption conduit pipe for many, in the Nigerian army. We know it. Nobody wants to speak to the truth. I'm speaking to the truth today. If you are a 4-star general and you have earned your PEEP, you should show us the ending of your PEEP by ending the war by ending the war in the Northeast. We've been involved in it for 15 years, fighting a ragtag terror group.
Wow.
And more importantly, our politicians must resolve, to address the issue of, radical Islamic education that is taking place in the north. As we are dealing with Boko Haram, another group has emerged in the northwest of Nigeria, the Takurawa group. So all of these are issues that we have to tie together as national policy issue that the state must address, and quickly.
All right, let's look at what the alternative avenues for accountability are. These are very strong claims that have been made, and a number of people seem to agree with them. But what independent bodies, watchdogs, organizations do you think need to step in to investigate this and make the findings, transparent and open to the public?
A body whose voice I should have had when this allegation broke out is the National Human Rights Commission. It's charged with responsibility by law to investigate some of these issues raised by Scott Perry and some of the issues that activists have constantly raised over the fight against terrorism in the Northeast. But unfortunately, I do not think that the National Human Rights Commission is structured at the moment as a governing council. I do not think so. Since the governing council headed by Professor Chidi Odikalo was sacked many years ago, I'm not sure that a governing council has been appointed. They have an EX at the moment, but like any institution of government that has some semblance of independence, it is not independent in the true essence of the word. When you are funded by government, you tend to dance to the dictate and tunes of the government. So the National Human Rights Commission has not shown independence. Again, too, the constitutional body charged with conducting investigation into matters of the public like this one is both arms of the National Assembly. If you look at more particularly section 80 to 88 of the 1999 Constitution. But we are dealing with a national legislative body that has credibility issues on its own. Don't forget that another American, Trigan Garbayan, also threw some allegations at the House of Representatives. If we have a body whose members could demand 150 million US bribe for the release of some business executives that the government had no business of detaining, I do not see the House of Representatives, talk less of Senate, addressing or investigating the matter. If they do, some people want to see it as an attempt.
I mean, from what you're saying, I think we can infer that you don't. From what you're saying, I think we can infer that you don't expect that there's anybody that will conduct an independent and fair investigation into this. So it will be, again, swept under the carpet.
Let's be honest with ourselves. The wheels have gone off the wagons of this government. It's not interested in addressing any of the big issues that Nigerians are asking them.
What's
all they will do, and they've already done, is to come up with some nonsense press release, exculpating them.
Just before we wrap up, Abdul Mahmud, as a takeaway, what steps should the Nigerian government take to ensure that international organizations and NGOs that their humanitarian aid genuinely reaches its intended beneficiaries without being diverted to fund terrorism? Because countries like Russia and China, they don't take foreign aid so as to avoid situations like this.
I think two things the government must do. One, at the level of resolution, it must resolve to end the conflict in the Northeast, without foreign aid and interest. The Northeast has become like sugar, like sugar to ants. So if there's a resolution on the part of the nation state, more particularly its armed weak, the Nigerian armed forces, to once and for all address the conflict and deal with it. NGOs, some of very shady nature will not proliferate in the Northeast. And two, the government has to look at how non-state actors are allowed into the theater of conflict. I know that at the moment there's restrictive entrance into Borno State, for example, and that has also helped, in the military addressing some of the issues arising from the conflict in the Northeast. That has also addressed the consistent allegations that the governors of Borno State have constantly made against NGOs. But because we are also in a democracy, it will be difficult for the government in a single fiat to ban NGOs from operating in conflict areas. But I think these NGOs must be made, to hang on, if you like. I'm looking for a word to use here. To operate within some sort of code that the military and the government set out for them that will guide their aids operation in the conflict areas. And the government, this is also the responsibility of government. Government must also ensure that those who set up NGOs for the purpose of distributing aid materials, must be checked in a manner that ensures that they have no relationship with terror groups. What I think has happened in the Northeast is individuals who are connected to Boko Haram setting up NGOs and getting funding and aid materials from aid agencies like you said.
All right.
There's a lapse or laxity in the way we allow NGOs to operate, in the way the CAC, Corporate Affairs Commission, lawfully allows the restriction of these agencies.
Mr. Abdul Mahmud, I mean, you've listed very key points on how this can be handled. It's one thing to know what should be done. It's another thing for it to be actually done. But we thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning on Breakfast.
Thank you for your insights, Abdul Mahmud.